So we are getting started with our lesson for tonight. Tonight we are, as we are doing for this year, reading from She Speaks, which is wisdom from the woman of the Bible to the modern day Black woman. This evening we are going to be talking about I Am Ruth. That is our lesson for tonight. This week and next week we will be going over the book of Ruth, which Ruth is one of the shortest books of the Bible. It happens to be my favorite. It is 4 chapters. It is not the shortest, but one of the shortest. And so tonight we're going to be discussing Ruth, and next week we're going to be talking about Naomi. So I'm going to talk a little bit, like their stories obviously are going to intertwine, and such a short amount of text, you obviously have rollover, but what I'm going to try to do is break it up between these 2 weeks so that we can have a clearer and better understanding. Now, I know that when it comes to the book of Ruth, everybody that knows about the book of Ruth is synonymous with Boaz. So everybody who's like, I'm looking for my Boaz, I'm looking for my Boaz, as if he was the only husband or person to find their wife in the Bible. I don't know why, but that is immediately where people go when they think about Ruth. Now, although that is a big and significant part of her story, I like the book of Ruth for so many other reasons. And I'm going to start off by saying that we want to get to the Boaz, or people want to get to the Boaz, but what they don't realize is what Ruth had to do and what she endured before she got there. So I'm going to give you guys a little background history about Ruth and where she comes from. So Ruth is from the city of Moab. Moab would be considered our modern day Las Vegas on steroids. So all of the stuff, like how we call Las Vegas Sin City, Moab was Sin City. It was, you name it, it's going down. No holds barred. You can have whatever you like. Turn up, turn up, turn up. All day, every day, Moab. That's where Moab is. Moab also is a reminder of us of how we even got here. So if you remember, we talked about earlier, I can't remember what month it was, when Lot and his daughters had sex with him and they conceived children. Moab was one of the children that came out of that. So we see that the Moabites and the city of Moab has come from a lineage of deceit, a lineage of things that we would consider to be unethical, things that are not of integrity. They got their dad drunk, they slept with him, and one of the children was Moab. So Ruth is from here. This is where she's from. Now, when Naomi and her husband come to Moab, they are leaving Judah, they are leaving Bethlehem and going to Moab. So it's like where they were coming from is where the Israelites got to when they were out of captivity. So this was the land flowing of milk and honey. This was the land of overflow. This was a promised land. They left their promised land and went to Moab. So we'll talk about more about that story next week when we talk about Naomi and her husband next week. But I just want to give us a picture of how we got here to Ruth, right? And Moab and the significance of Moab. So Ruth is considered a Moabite. She is a woman from Moab. She's a Moabite woman. And her mother-in-law comes there with her father-in-law, and then now her husband, brother-in-law, and she has a sister-in-law named Orpah. First, Elimelech, which is the father of Ruth's husband, dies. Then following that, her husband and her brother-in-law both die. Now, it is customary that you usually marry within the family, but at that time, it was only the 3 men that were in the family, and all 3 of the men in the family died. So it left a family of women, which is Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth. So Naomi has realized, we'll talk about why they even got to Moab next week, but Naomi realizes there's nothing left here for me. This is not where I'm supposed to be. We really don't even know if she wanted to be there, but she decides that she's going to leave. When she leaves, her daughter-in-laws are going with her. She then stops as they're en route, and she tells them basically, I have nothing for you. There is nothing for me to give you. I have no more sons for you to marry. Even if I got married today and had sons, would you wait for my sons to become of age for you to marry and have children with? Like, leave. Don't worry about me, because we know that at this point they had no children outside of the ones that she had no children outside of the ones that had died. And that means Ruth and Orpah had no children. So Orpah, they're crying, they're sobbing. It's this whole like scene that happens, and Orpah decides to go back to Moab. Ruth gives this beautiful speech where she says, where you go, I will go. Your people will become my people. Your God will become my God. I will live with you until the day I die, and wherever you are buried is where I will be buried too. This is me paraphrasing, but that's basically the sonnet or speech that she gives to Naomi. So the first thing that we can see from this is that Ruth was loyal. I know last week we talked about, when we talked about Delilah and Samson, we talked about these hoes ain't loyal. This week, Ruth was loyal. She flipped the script on them. We know that because of Ruth's loyalty to Naomi, it didn't matter what happened. She had decided as a loyalty to Naomi, she was going to go wherever she was going to go. She was going to forsake her land. She was going to forsake the gods that they had there. And Moab was known for idols. They had multiple gods. This is the sin city at a time. So Ruth is like, I'm not going back there. I love you. I loved your son. I loved your family. I'm going wherever you go. So they go back to Bethlehem, Judah. And when they get there, people are talking. So she's going into a land where she's basically hated, because the Israelites hated the people of Moab because of how ungodly and unruly they were. But she decided to leave from a place of comfort to go to a place of discomfort, to be able to be with her mother-in-law and to be able to honestly serve her. That is what Ruth's role was. And she's like, I'm going to make sure that I am of service to and for you. So the people are mumbling, the people are chattering, the people got stuff to say, but Ruth is not like, it's not going to matter. I'm still going to go with you. So they go back, and they now have to fend for themselves, because back in the times of the Bible, the people who were the most unnoticed and the less fortunate were children or orphans and widows. So orphans were the children who didn't have parents, and widows, of course, are women who have their husbands have died. So it was basically like you needed someone to take care of you. So that was the role that Ruth decided to take on for Naomi. So she basically is like, okay, well, we got to eat. So I need to find a field for me to be able to go glean in. So she goes and she finds this field, and the field that she finds happens to be the field of Boaz. This is when Boaz is introduced into the story. Now, Ruth is out there, she's gleaning and she's picking up the barley and the stuff that's left. And they were supposed to leave that for the orphans and the widows. So she's going and she's gleaning. Boaz sees her working and asks his fieldsmen, who is that woman? And they said, that is Ruth. That is the woman that came back with Naomi. It is her daughter-in-law of her deceased son. And so he says, let her stay here, actually drop a little extra for her so that she can have more than what you typically would leave, so that she's good, right? So Boaz is showing, one, he saw her working. She wasn't worried about him. She wasn't going there looking for a man. She went because she needed to survive, and she was serving her mother-in-law. So when she gets there and she starts to see this, Boaz then approaches her and says, hey, don't go to another field. You'll be safe here. You'll be taken care of here. You'll be able to eat with the people who are working the fields. Go get water from the well, from what they've drawn from the well when you need water. Your needs will be provided here. So Boaz shows up in Ruth's life as a provider and as a safe place for her. So although she was not going there for that, he showed himself to be that for her. So she goes back and she tells Naomi what has happened. Naomi gives her some wisdom and gives her some things of what to do. We'll talk about that next week. She does these things because she is a servant to Naomi, and she's also obedient. She understands that she does not know everything. So she's going to glean from the wisdom of Naomi, who is her elder, and she's going to listen to what it is that she has told her to do. She listens to what Naomi tells her to do. She goes and lays at the feet of Boaz. She said, uncover his feet. When he comes, tell him, you are our kinsman redeemer. I'm here to now serve you, because as a servant, I'm no longer going to serve my mother-in-law, but I will come and serve you. And he's like, okay, I see what you have done, but I actually am not the next one in line. There is one that is closer that is supposed to be your kinsman redeemer. So what he then does is he goes and he gets that man and he puts him in the court of the other elders. So he says, basically, this is the woman, your kinsman has passed away and you have rights to his land. Do you want it? The man says yes initially. After he says yes, then he comes back and he's like, well, Boaz says, okay, but if you take the land, you also have to take Ruth and you have to take Naomi. He like, that's where I draw the line. I already got enough women in my life that I got issues with. I ain't trying to have no more. It's all yours, buddy. So he's like, no, never mind. So in that time, the way of like basically agreeing and passing on, like how we would say a handshake or a contract or your signature on something, what they had to do was remove their sandal. So in the presence of everyone, which shows that Boaz knew protocol and he wasn't stupid and he did not want things to come back to he said, she said, well, I really didn't say that. So he made sure that he had enough witnesses there to be able to witness this man saying no, taking off his sandal, and that becoming their contract for him to now have the land of their kinsmen, and also which meant he would have Ruth and Naomi in addition because they came with the land. So he marries Ruth. They go on, they begin to have children, and we later know that Ruth, or I'm not going to say we know, we later find out that Ruth becomes the great grandmother of Jesus, because in her lineage leads to David, which leads to Jesus. So what do I want us to take from this? One, we saw that Ruth was loyal. So our loyalty to things that are positive for us, being loyal to stuff that does not mean you good, which is what we saw last week in Samson and Delilah, and his first wife and all these other things, that's not what I'm talking about. Us having loyalty to people and things that we know have our best interests at heart is always so important, and having people around you to whom that same loyalty is granted and given from. So we see that she is loyal. We then see that Ruth did not have a problem with working. She was not the passenger princess like I'm trying to be right now. She was not like, I'm gonna wait and see what comes to me. I'm gonna sit here. I'm not gonna do anything. I'm just going to expect for good things to happen. A lot of times we try to say, change your thought, change your mind, and have positive thoughts and think good things are going to happen. Yes, that can be true, but at the same time, you need to put some work and some effort into it. So when we talked about faith and hope, we talked about your faith is activated by you actually doing the work, because what? Faith without works is dead. So Ruth was working. She wasn't worried about what was going to come. She just knew that she was going to do what she had to do in order to make sure that she was taken care of and that her mother-in-law was going to be taken care of. We also see Ruth was there to serve. Ruth wasn't going to Naomi like, okay, well, I'm taking care of you. What are you going to give me? I'm taking care of you. What are, you just going to sit here and wait for me to do all of the gleaning? Or you going to sit here and wait for me to do all the cooking? No, Ruth never went into her service with asking. She literally was serving. And so many times we go into situations where we are supposed to be serving with an expectation. She had no expectations of anything. So if you're ever going to help or be there for somebody, do it without expectations, because sometimes that may be an attachment to your blessings. And even if it's not, knowing that you're blessing someone else is always a positive thing. Then we see when she does finally get approached by Boaz, this is the part of the story that everybody comes on. But what I like to point as is it's really not about her finding her Boaz, or even if it was, you have to realize what she had to do in order to get this. Something had to die. Her husband died. She had to leave everything she knew, go into an uncomfortable situation in an unknown place, into unknown territory, into an unknown circumstance, and have faith that God was going to provide for her before she got to Boaz. And she had to work for it. So we want to say, I want my Boaz, and your Boaz may not be a man. It may be a job. It may be a house. It may be a whatever. It may be a new boat, a truck, whatever your Boaz is, whatever you think is supposed to come and be the thing that saves you, you have to think, what has to die? What do I have to leave? And who do I have to serve to be able to get into this position? What work do I need to do before I can even get there? Because she just didn't go to Bethlehem and just all of a sudden found Boaz, or Boaz found her. That's not what happened, and that's not how it worked. And this is why this is one of my favorite stories or books of the Bible, is because I love how small it is, but how intricate it is and how many like nuggets are in there, because we have to die daily to ourselves. But in order for us to get to the next, we have to leave some things behind. So she left her family behind. She left her tradition behind. She left her religion behind. She left all of that behind to go for what she knew was going to be better for her in her mind. Nothing around her looked like that. Nothing around her was going to show her that. Nothing that she saw or thought or conceived in her mind was leading to that. But she knew, I'm going to follow after her God, because I see the blessings that have been attached to her. And so she goes there. So then when she does finally get her Boaz, she does finally become a wife. She does finally have not just the land she was working on, she now owns the land that she's working on with her husband. She gets all of the blessings after this. But sometimes we don't want to go through that part. We just want to skip to the good part. What's that? It was a meme or a song that said, can we skip to the good part? We can't. We can't always skip to the good part. We sometimes have to go through things until we can get there. And so that is what I want us to take from the book of Ruth. In addition to one last thing, is that because of her obedience, we were able to have the lineage to Jesus. That is how she is Jesus's great grandmother. So you don't know what your obedience will birth. You don't know what your sacrifices will birth. You don't know what you taking the next step into what God has for you will birth, but you have to be willing to be obedient in whatever situation or circumstance it may be. And no matter how uncertain you may feel about it, if it is where God has led you, and this is why it's so important to have discernment and wisdom and to be able to clearly identify God's voice, because sometimes we'll be going off and doing stuff on our own, and when it don't work out, we'll be like, Lord, why did you leave me here? He be like, fool, I ain't said that. That did not come from me. That was all you, baby. So we have to be wise in our decisions and making sure that we are truly spending time in God's word so that we can get direction from him. And we know when he's speaking to us, so that when he says move, we move. And that our obedience will then carry over for generations and generations and generations to come. Because our salvation can now be attached to Ruth's obedience. Had Ruth decided, I'm going to stay here, had she been Orpah, nothing against Orpah, but it ain't a book about her, but had she done what Orpah did and went back to Moab, not saying Jesus would have came, but it would have been through somebody else, because God is going to use somebody else. He's going to get somebody else to do it. But because of her obedience, it was her, and she's honored in that way because she's one of the two women of the Bible who have books about them, is Ruth and Esther. And both of them had to have stuff die. Both of them had to sacrifice stuff, and both of them had to take chances. We saw that with Esther. Esther's parents died. She was raised by her family members. She then had to sacrifice. She had to go into preparation for a year. She had to make sure that she was groomed. She had to make sure that she was the fairest of them all before she was chosen by the king. And then she had to sacrifice it all. And she was willing to lose it by going to him and asking for her people to be saved when she wasn't supposed to. She was uncertain. She said, if I perish, let me perish. So sometimes we don't know. This is the same thing that we see with Ruth, is that we don't know. She doesn't know what she's going to, but she has faith in what she's going to. She knows what she's hoping for. She knows what her expectations are. And so she goes into it with that faith and hope. And that's the same faith and hope we need to have in the situations of our life. So that is what I have for you guys today. I'm going to stop this recording and we are going to start back up for our membership recording. Hold on.